So there I was, finishing my final sprint in the residence lounge on the third floor of the orthopedic center at Miami-Jackson Memorial Hospital. October in Miami, scorching hot outside, and it was about equally intense in that room. I collapsed onto my colleague Lexi Jones, completely spent, gasping like I just run a marathon. Which, in a manner of speaking, I sort of had. Lexi's hand was tracing circles on my back, and then out of nowhere she drops the bomb. "Chun, let's get married." I went completely rigid. Not a peep out of me. Just lay there pretending I'd passed out from exhaustion, which was honestly less cowardly than the alternative. She shoved me. I kept pretending. She shoved me again. Finally I sat up, and there she was, this gorgeous woman with wheat-colored skin and curly brown hair, staring at me like I owed her money. Which, to be fair, I probably did if you counted 2 years of whatever we had as a debt. She said she was serious. Said we'd been doing this for 2 years and it was time to move to the next stage. I rolled over, looked at her, and decided to go with honesty. Told her I wasn't ready, that I hated marriage, and the reason was, well, my family situation, and anyway, she cut me off before I could dig that hole any deeper. She just shrugged and said she knew my family was terrible, but who didn't have a terrible family? I was about to respond when some frantic knocking saved my life. A deep, booming male voice from the other side of the door, yelling that he knew I was in there, demanding I come out and explain myself. That was Matthew Davis, our attending physician. Lexi recognized the voice and her expression shifted. The door flew open. Matthew stormed in, still in his surgical cap, completely ignoring the fact that we were, getting dressed. He went straight for me, asking why I was suddenly resigning, whether old Dale from Baptist Hospital had poached me. Before I could answer, Lexi piped up, shrieking that I was refusing to marry her and resigning at the same time. Matthew froze. Marriage? Us. He looked like his brain was short-circuiting. He was about to say congratulations, you could see it on his face, but instead he just pointed at me and roared about why I refused Lexi and why I was quitting. Then they both yelled at me in unison, which was really something. I told them I just remembered I had a patient to check on, grabbed my pager, and ran for my life. 3 days later, I walked out of that same orthopedic center carrying a box of my stuff. I spent 5 years there. My 20s into my 30s, on top of 8 years of college and med school, 600 grand in loans, and 100+ hour work weeks. I'd finally made it to respected orthopedic attending physician, and the sensible move was to coast from there, easy clinic shifts, surgery, a 6-figure salary, the whole deal. But I'd thought about it and decided to resign anyway. Chase a dream. Through the glass curtain wall, I could see Lexi on the 2nd floor. She hadn't come to my farewell party. She was probably still mad. I sighed and walked away. Okay, so maybe it wasn't as dramatic as I was making it sound. It was just a resignation. America was desperate for doctors. I could go back anytime. And as for Lexi, well, we still lived in the same apartment. I was already thinking about picking up groceries and cooking her a big apology meal. Got my stuff in the car and my phone rang. Mom. Her hoarse voice asking how I was doing, mentioning it was already cold in Chicago. I reminded her I was in Miami. She panicked about me driving and talking on the phone, so I pretended to pull over. Then she got to the point, her voice dropping to a whisper. Dad's death anniversary was coming up in a week. Was I coming home this year? I'd missed it the last 2 years because of work. My left hand clenched into a fist. I told her to take care of herself, take her medicine on time, and hung up fast. Sitting there in the car, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Medium-length hair, strong square features from my mixed-race dad. I grinned at my reflection and told myself to believe in it, because I was a man with a system now. Then I dialed a number I'd saved a long time ago. Miami Heat. My name was Chun Yu, orthopedic surgeon. Wanted to make an appointment with Dr. Ron Cap. It was November 1st, the day of Miami's season opener. The Heat were in a rough spot. Their star player Alonzo Mourning had come back from winning gold with the Dream Team at the Olympics, only to get diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis right at the start of the month. Kidney disease. The only real option was a transplant, and the American organ transplant system was a nightmare that every doctor complained about. It wasn't until the season opener that Ron Cap finally had half an hour for me. I put on the expensive suit Lexi had bought me and drove to the American Airlines arena early. Big day, Riley going for his 1,000th career win, so I needed to dodge the traffic. I'd been a Heat fan for 5 years, had season tickets, knew the arena. But the office area was new territory. After 3 cups of coffee in the waiting room, the blonde receptionist, who'd been finding excuses to refill my cup and chat me up every 5 minutes, finally told me Cap was ready. She slipped me her business card on the way by. Can't blame her. Handsome, well-dressed, high-earning doctor. She had a solid resume of reasons. Cap's office was small, crammed with files, a medical skeleton in the corner, half its arms sitting on his desk. The man himself was in his 50s, red nose, thinning messy hair. He shook my hand, sat me down, and went back to my resume. 2 recommendation letters in there, one from a UCSF department chair, one from the head of orthopedics at Jackson Memorial. He put the resume down, looked at me, and asked the question I'd been expecting. He said my resume was flawless, but he couldn't understand why I wanted to be a team doctor. Before I could even open my mouth, Cap answered his own question. Said there was no reason for me to do this, whether it was income or career development. And he wasn't wrong. NBA players were basically heaven's chosen ones, salaries at the top of all 4 major American leagues. But that was the players. As team staff, a full-time team doctor's income wasn't actually that high. I mean, it was still way above what regular employees made because he was a doctor and all, but probably just a little over 200 grand a year. That was something I could pull in after just a few years at a hospital. And then there was career development. A team doctor was a team doctor forever. They weren't going to promote you to general manager. The day you became a team doctor was the day you hit your ceiling. In a hospital, though, with my resume, Cap figured I had enormous potential. A few years and I could be head of orthopedics, do some research, win some awards, maybe become a renowned name in the field. Income and social status both would blow being a team doctor out of the water. Then he added, grumbling, that the work was exhausting too, rubbing his lower back as he said it. He was the head of the medical staff, so while he didn't have to travel for every away game, it was still frequent. The workload was anything but light. In his opinion, only middle-aged doctors with no room for advancement left in the hospital system would even consider going full-time team doctor. So he looked at me, dead serious, and asked why. I prepared for this one. I told him it was passion. I went into orthopedics because I loved sports, and I was dedicated to building a career in sports medicine. Said it with a smile and everything. Cap studied me. He could tell my gaze was sincere, but he had a gut feeling I was hiding something. Didn't matter anymore, though. He told me he was sorry, but he had to turn me down. They couldn't afford 2 full-time team doctors, and with my credentials, making me a physical therapist or athletic trainer would be a waste. Most NBA teams ran lean on the medical side. When a player got hurt, the team doctor did on-site assessment, and the actual treatment happened at a partner hospital. Management didn't expect the in-house doctor to be performing surgery on players. Only the wealthy teams like the Suns and Lakers could afford extra doctors on staff. Everyone else ran with 1 full-time team doctor, a physical therapist, and a trainer. Cap was happy with his setup and had no reason to hire anyone else. I started to explain that I'd actually come hoping to join his team, but it was clear he'd misunderstood. He thought I wanted his job. Before I could clear things up, a young man pushed the door open from outside, saying little Anthony's shoulder was sore and did Cap want to go check on it. Cap nodded, handed my resume back, and told me sincerely that if he were me, he'd reconsider. Then he walked out, but stopped at the door, turned back, and said to stay and watch the game since it was the season opener. He'd have Miss Raven get me a ticket near the front. Then he was gone. I sighed and picked up my resume. I'd known this wouldn't be easy. Hospitals were always short on doctors, but team spots were all filled. If I were Cap, I wouldn't fire a team doctor I'd worked with for years to hire some fresh graduate either. Plus, he'd clearly misunderstood me today. I decided to stick around and find a chance to talk to him after the game. Miss Raven, the receptionist who'd slipped me her card earlier, got me a staff pass and offered to give me a tour of the arena. I declined, bought a hot dog, waited until it was about time, then headed toward the court. Game was at 7, but teams started prepping 2 hours early. It was a little after 5 and players were already showing up in groups for individual warm-ups. The floor wasn't open to spectators yet, but I had a staff pass, so I figured I could get down there. I wanted to observe the medical team at work. I took a service corridor, underground, branching in every direction. First time there, so I was navigating by feel. Somehow ended up on the visiting team side. Didn't matter. They'd already arrived. From a distance, I spotted Tracy McGrady, that young superstar who just signed a massive contract with the Magic over the summer. This year's 5th overall pick Mike Miller was with him, both of them coming out of the visiting locker room, laughing and heading for the court. I followed basketball but hadn't watched many games with my work schedule. Still, I knew the big names. Then another person walked out behind them. Grant Hill. I recognized him immediately, the guy who'd been hailed as Jordan's successor. I remembered he'd left the Pistons for the Magic that summer. The media was losing their minds about him and McGrady forming Orlando's new dynamic duo. Hill was in a tracksuit but wasn't heading for the court. He was pacing back and forth in the corridor, deliberately moving his left foot. I remembered he'd sprained his left ankle during the second round of last season's playoffs. Against the Heat, if I recalled right. He should have had surgery. I wondered if his recovery had gone sideways. My gaze landed on his left foot, and I silently activated my system's eye of all-seeing. It was the only passive skill I'd gotten with the sports medicine master system. Basically gave me a God's eye view of anything I looked at. And just like that, my eyes went full X-ray, piercing through Hill's skin layer by layer. I could see the dense network of tendons in the ankle, the 3 bones forming the ankle joint, the tibia, the fibula, and the injured talus with a metal plate attached to it. It was vivid, perfectly clear, way more powerful than any medical imaging equipment I'd ever used. I frowned. Several problems. Inflamed peroneus longus muscle. Minor capillary ruptures in the tibionavicular ligament. The guy had clearly twisted his ankle again. But the worst part was the talus. The one with the metal implant had developed new microscopic cracks. I figured he'd had the surgery in early May, about 180 days ago. For cracks to show up already meant either his post-op rehab was garbage or he'd re-injured it. The damage was so minor that even medical equipment would have trouble catching it, which was why Hill could still walk around normally. I thought about it for a moment, then walked straight up to him and told him that if I were him, I'd sit right down and stop moving that left foot. Hill looked up at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He glanced around, confirmed we were alone in the hallway, and asked if I was talking to him. His voice was gentle, refined, total gentleman. Matched everything the media said about him. The guy was hailed as Jordan's successor and was basically the nicest person in sports. He'd transformed Detroit from a team full of fists and trash talk and Rodman into something almost pleasant. All because of his demeanor. I nodded. I was 187 centimeters tall, and I still had to look up to talk to him. I pointed at his left ankle and told him if he wanted to finish the season without incident, he needed to rest. Otherwise, it was only going to get worse. Introduced myself, orthopedic surgeon. He noticed my heat work pass and asked if I was the team doctor. I told him no, I'd actually just interviewed for the position and didn't get it. He apologized, then asked how I could tell there was a problem without any equipment, not even a physical exam. I told him it was his posture. There were subtle differences between a healthy person and someone with an injury. I had him try a movement with me, hand on the wall, lift the left foot, curl the toes, point them forward, then slowly point the foot down. I asked if he felt a pinprick-like pain. He did. Using the eye of all-seeing, I'd already spotted the problems. The peroneus longus muscle had a minor strain, probably from overexertion. Muscles regenerate well, so that wasn't the big concern. The real issue was the tibionavicular ligament. Ligament injuries were harder to detect and took longer to heal. Hill's heart clearly skipped a beat. He actually felt it. He asked what was wrong with him. For a guy who'd only missed 5 games in his entire 4-year career, this was alarming. After the ankle fracture last season, he'd started taking his body more seriously. I told him it was a minor ligament strain in the tibionavicular ligament, likely from high-intensity movements. His breathing got faster. Ligaments were every athlete's Achilles heel. Nobody dared be careless about them. I told him not to panic and had him do one more test. Flat foot on the ground, shift weight, press down, roll the ankle inward. I asked if there was a faint tearing or pulling sensation in the joint. There was. That talus bone also had some extremely fine cracks. I figured it was related to the surgical plate placement and his playing style. The surgeon had considered it, but not thoroughly enough. For a regular person, walking and running was enough. For someone like Hill, known for explosive first steps and flashy moves, his ankle was constantly pushed to its absolute limit and had to withstand immense pressure. The plate's placement wasn't optimal, and over time it would affect healing and cause new injuries. Hill's eyes went wide. Everything matched. His calm expression vanished. That first major injury had already taken a psychological toll, and now his ankle was showing problems again. He was terrified of going down the same path. I could see the panic setting in, so I told him to calm down. The issues weren't that serious yet. Just some risk factors. Rest for a while, protect the ankle, and it should ease up. The real problem was that his training intensity was too high and he'd returned to competition without being fully recovered. That's why I'd told him to stop moving in the first place. He looked at me with suspicion. Half believed me, half didn't, which was fair. I was a stranger on a random hallway, and after his last major injury, he'd developed an instinctive distrust of doctors. And for good reason. Last season he'd felt soreness in his ankle. The team doctor said nothing was wrong. He played a few more games, still sore. The Pistons were fighting for a playoff spot, so the doctor examined him again and said it was just a sprain. Rest a few games. Then the playoffs started and he sprained it in the very first game. The doctor told him it was just a bone bruise, could still play the second game. He tried, made it to the third quarter and couldn't go on. Hospital exam revealed his ankle had been fractured the whole time. The team doctor had been deceiving him from the start. If it had been treated properly, it never would have gotten to a fracture. A big part of why he left the Pistons that summer was because of that betrayal. After some thought, he asked for my business card. Said he appreciated the advice and might have more questions later. I handed one over. He believed me, but not completely. That was normal. For a star player of his caliber, he'd need multiple opinions before making any decisions. Looking at his ankle, I felt an impulse. His problems weren't actually that severe. 1 or 2 weeks of rest, followed by a gold-level massage from the system, should resolve everything. I silently pulled up my system, the Sports Medicine Master System with a bunch of categories underneath. Sports First Aid at 44%, 11 out of 100 experience, bronze level effect. Sports Medicine at 72%, silver level effects. Sports Rehabilitation at 69% with a gold level effect. Sports Psychology, Sports Nutrition, Sports Training, all at various stages. The percentages were my mastery of each category's knowledge, and the experience bars filled up every time I performed a related action. Once full, there was a chance to unlock a therapeutic effect at a certain level. The highest I'd gotten so far was gold level, which boosted a single treatment's effect by 60%. Not just a number thing. Even the bronze level effect was astonishing when I tested it on hospital patients. If I used it on Hill, his recovery would be faster and far exceed expectations. For professional athletes, surgery was always the last resort. The incision meant a wound, and the long recovery and rehab periods meant that even after the body healed, it took forever to get back to athletic form. For an NBA player like Hill, surgery would basically mean his season was over. Massage might not sound cutting edge, but it was actually the most suitable conservative treatment for maintaining high-level performance. Especially when I had the eye of all-seeing, letting me target every damaged muscle and ligament precisely and watch them recover in real time. Plus, there was the system's added effect. After testing it on hospital patients, I was pretty sure there was some unknown, mysterious power at play. The system itself being mysterious was a whole other thing. Hill's attitude made it clear he wasn't going to let me work on him directly. Fortunately, his problem wasn't too serious. As long as he followed medical advice and rested properly, he'd be fine. He thanked me, shook my hand, and headed back to the locker room. Once back, the first thing he did was find the team's traveling physical therapist, Paul Houston. They were playing an away game, so the Magic's team doctor, Joe Biling, hadn't traveled with the team. Houston was in his 30s, had worked under Biling back at the Orlando Veterans Affairs Medical Center, but the brutal residency training system had weeded him out. On Biling's advice, he switched to physical therapy and rehab, and when Biling became the Magic's full-time team doctor, he brought Houston along. Hill told Houston his left foot was still sore and asked him to check it again. Houston had him sit down immediately. Hill was the biggest star on the Magic roster, so his health was paramount. Houston placed his hands on the foot and examined each bone meticulously, asking if it was worse or better than that morning. He'd examined Hill before they flew from Washington to Miami, and Hill had mentioned soreness then too. Hill said it felt about the same, not noticeably worse or better. Then he hesitated and asked if his ligament was strained. Houston was surprised, then immediately shook his head. Said if he really had a strained ligament, he wouldn't be able to walk properly. Asked what made him think that. Hill hedged and said it was just a guess. He didn't mention me, still having his own doubts. Houston finished the exam and was about to answer when Doug Rivers walked in, probably coming back from the pregame press conference. He saw Hill on the bench with his shoe off getting examined and immediately walked over, asking what was wrong. He had every reason to be nervous. The Magic had traded away to Ben and Atkins and given Hill a massive 7-year contract, betting everything on him and McGrady leading the team to glory. Houston told the coach that Grant's ankle was sore, but he hadn't found any obvious damage, probably just fatigue. His recommendation was to sit Hill out for this one. He hadn't found evidence of the ligament strain Hill mentioned, but since Hill said it was sore, it had to be taken seriously. Best to rest him for one game. Rivers visibly relaxed at the no obvious damage part, but frowned at the rest recommendation. Last season, as a rookie coach, he'd taken over from Chuck Daly and gone 41-41, missing the playoffs but earning Coach of the Year with a roster full of undrafted players. This year, management had signed McGrady and Hill. They wanted results, wanted the playoffs. So Rivers was taking this game against the Heat, a strong Eastern contender, very seriously. He wanted to test his new lineup. If Hill sat out, things would be tough, even with the Heat also missing Mourning. Rivers asked if Houston was sure he couldn't play. Houston glanced at Hill, nodded, and said one game of rest should be enough. Fine for the game against the Wizards the day after tomorrow. Rivers had to listen to the medical staff. He agreed. By 6 o'clock, the American Airlines Arena, capacity over 19,000, was packed. Season opener, long off-season, Miami fans were fired up. When the cheerleaders took the court, the atmosphere hit peak levels. The Heat's cheerleading squad, much like Miami itself, was always the hottest in the country. I was sitting right behind the Heat's bench next to the aisle. Long-legged cheerleaders running past gave me quite the view. Before the game, Mourning made a surprise appearance and gave an encouraging speech. Toward the end, he talked about his kidney disease, and with the whole arena pleading, this tough guy's eyes moistened as he repeated that he would be back. The place erupted. I stood up and clapped along with everyone. 5 years in Miami, I'd seen plenty of Mourning's games. Unexpectedly, after the speech, Mourning ended up sitting right in front of me. I didn't ask for an autograph. Instead, I activated the eye of all-seeing and looked at his kidneys. My vision pierced through skin and muscle into the kidneys themselves. His disease was focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. I could see at a glance that many glomerular segments had hardened. I sighed and retracted my gaze. That hardening was irreversible. The disease was caused by a genetic mutation, and its prevalence among African Americans wasn't low. For an ordinary person, just surviving was hard enough, let alone competing at a professional level. Nothing I could do. Only option was a kidney transplant. I looked across the court at Hill. He was in his warm-ups, not doing any drills, just sitting obediently on the sidelines. I felt relieved. He'd taken some of my words to heart. That was the right call. Playing through a known injury was extremely irresponsible, no matter who you were. First time I'd watched a game this up close. Sitting high in the stands gave you a panoramic view, but courtside was a completely different animal. Right at the start, The towering Mike Miller launched a corner three-pointer maybe 3 meters in front of me. The sense of immersion was unreal. Unfortunately, he missed. Logically, it was the Heat's season opener. After a long off-season, you'd expect players to need time to find their rhythm. But the Heat came out firing. Tim Hardaway, the Beatle, was going up against Darrell Armstrong. He didn't have that famous killer crossover anymore, but a simple shift in his center of gravity was still enough to drain a steady mid-range jumper. I couldn't help but take a second look at Hardaway. Same famous last name as the Phoenix Suns superstar, and his own reputation was no joke. His killer crossover was so good that Magic Johnson himself had called him one of the league's top ball handlers. One Rookie of the Year, and from his second season on, he was putting up 20 and 10, cementing himself as one of the best point guards in the league. Then, at the peak of his career, his first major injury hit. Torn ACL in his left knee. Out for the season. When he came back, still put up top numbers, 20 points and 9 assists, but that unstoppable killer crossover was gone. He changed his style, started focusing on three-pointers under old Nelson's guidance. Back in 92-93, he was averaging only 4.7 three-point attempts per game. First season back, that jumped to 7.2. His drives were slower now, but his shot was getting more and more accurate. I let my gaze penetrate Hardaway's left knee, and what I saw was not pretty. An ACL tear often led to collateral ligament and meniscus tears too. One injury caused a cascade. Surgical repair was difficult, and more importantly, it was nearly impossible for the ligament to regain its original strength. Ligaments had poor regenerative capabilities to begin with. Tearing them also destroyed the already sparse microvascular structure inside, cutting blood supply even further. Add scar tissue from surgery and ligament retraction posterior, and even a perfect-looking repair meant the ligament strength was a shadow of what it once was. Athletic decline was inevitable. Hardaway's left knee was a prime example. The repaired ligament was a mess of scar tissue, atrophied and ruptured microvessels everywhere. Surrounding ligaments and meniscus showed damage too, tissue hyperplasia, fluid buildup. If a healthy knee was a clean, tidy room, Hardaway's knee was one that a burglar had ransacked and flipped upside down. I crossed my arms and wondered if there was a way to repair this kind of damage. After a moment, I decided there probably was. Not because my surgical skills were better. They were on par with top specialists, same as everyone else. The only advantage I had was the eye of all-seeing. Could even the most skilled surgeon operate with a live CT scan, observing every tiny bit of damage and treating it specifically? Of course not. But I could. Wherever my gaze fell, I could see the most minuscule tears and figure out how to fix them. Combined with targeted post-op rehab, research showed that specific exercises during recovery could help healing tissue by applying longitudinal loads to the original tissue, optimizing its mechanical properties and preserving athletic ability. Not to mention, I had those level-based treatment bonuses too. Unfortunately, Hardaway's knee was already in this state. A complete recovery would probably be very difficult now. The first quarter ended. The Magic played like they'd forgotten how basketball worked. Complete mess. Only 14 points the entire quarter. Tracy McGrady, the superstar the Magic's management had pinned their hopes on, shot 3 for 8, 7 points. Even that was half the team's total. 2 of the 5 starters hadn't scored at all. The Heat, on the other hand, were terrifyingly efficient. Made 13 of 16 shots, 80% shooting. Hardaway alone had 12 points, leading the team to 37 in the quarter. A 23-point lead after just one quarter. The game was basically over. Rivers stood on the sideline with his arms crossed, expression grim. He hadn't expected the gap to be this wide. They were on the second night of a back-to-back, sure, but this was still too poor. He glanced toward Hill in the corner of the bench. If Hill were out there, things wouldn't look this ugly. Mike Miller was still too green to carry the team. But Hill was already ruled out, so what could Rivers do? He pulled McGrady aside and told him to play more methodically. McGrady's sleepy eyes were full of helplessness. He'd gotten his max contract, but this was only his 4th year. Going up against Eddie Jones, an all-star level two-way guard, was giving him a real headache. Second quarter, the Magic found some rhythm but only managed to play even with the Heat. By halftime, the gap was still a massive 24 points. As players headed off, Ron Cap, who'd been sitting in the front row, followed them into the players' tunnel. I'd started to raise my hand to say hello, but he strode right past. Busiest time for a team doctor, halftime. Players feeling discomfort, needing checks to maintain performance for the second half. I was filled with frustration. Had all these skills and nowhere to use them. If the Heat didn't work out, what about other professional leagues? Miami wasn't just the Heat. It was a famous sports city, all 4 major leagues represented. The Dolphins in football, the Marlins in baseball, the Florida Panthers in hockey over in Broward County. Any professional sports team needed a team doctor, and I wasn't limiting myself to basketball. It wasn't going to be easy, though. Every spot was filled. Hospitals were everywhere, but there were only so many teams and therefore only so many team doctor positions. When a team had a good doctor, management wasn't in any hurry to replace him. And if the team doctor's skills weren't up to par, they could always fly in a specialist. As a young doctor fresh out of residency, my credentials were still thin. If it weren't for my stellar resume and 2 impressive recommendation letters, Cap might not have even bothered chatting with me. Most importantly, I had my heart set on a basketball team specifically. Halftime ended, and throughout the second half my mood was as complex as Rivers. The Magic still couldn't find an answer for the Heat's offense. Rivers looked like he was at his wit's end. Third quarter, the Heat outscored them 25-18, widening the gap even more. By the fourth quarter, Riley had already coolly subbed out his starters and was basking in the cheers. In 12 minutes he'd be tied with old Wilkins as the second coach in NBA history to reach 1,000 wins. Unfortunately, Riley glanced at Morning, dressed sharply in a suit, and his good mood soured. He and Cap had discussed Morning's condition more than once. Cap had already tactfully advised him to prepare for the possibility of losing Morning. All Riley could feel was helplessness. Cap was a good doctor and a good partner, but he was a man, not a god. As the game wound down, the DJ started shouting Riley's name. The Heat bench joined the celebration. Fans were already chanting for a championship. Miami's fans never lacked a burning desire for a title, especially since Riley took over in '95 and they'd made the playoffs every year but always fell short at the final hurdle.